afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me today for our State Financial Aid Program Updates webinar. My name is Giselle Martinez, and I'm a program specialist in the Resource Development Department in the Student Financial Aid Programs, or SFAP division at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I also have with me some additional colleagues at the coordinating board from SFAP, Leah Smalley, Chris Willen, and Harvey Giblin and Alex Bobe, who will be available to assist with any questions that you may have throughout the presentation, which can be sent in the chat box. And as a reminder, we will have the video and PDF versions of the presentation available and an announcement will be sent once it is available. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. So our topics of discussion today include the 25-26 program guidelines. We'll be looking at not only the various updates that have been made for the year, but what really we'll be really delving into why we produce these resources for institutions. We'll take a brief looking into the two types of codes that are included, and then taking a deep dive into the administrative code to teach y'all how to find information to help you better administer state aid programs. Then we'll look at some deadlines, reminders, and notifications. And then at last, we'll touch on the ways you can stay connected with us throughout the year. And at the end, we'll allow time for some questions, but at any point, please feel free to send your question in the chat. All right, so let's talk about program guidelines. So each year, the Student Financial Aid Programs Division at the Coordinating Board publishes guidelines to support institutions in the administration of state financial aid programs. These resource documents can be found on our SFAP webpage under the applicable program. The content in these guidelines is composed of relevant statutes, or what people refer to as laws, various rules, and operational procedures. Now, before we go through the various guideline updates that have been made for this year, let's talk about what tends to drive these changes to the guidelines. One of the biggest contributors to these changes is legislation, including new laws, changes to existing laws, or the elimination of a law. That's also called a repeal. So before we dive into the guidelines, let's start at the beginning. How does a law come to be? So pictured here is a very, very simple flowchart depicting the legislative process. And in actuality, this chart should be about 10 to 20 slides long. But for the purpose of this presentation, we are going to keep this at a very high level. If you want more information or want to learn more on the process, we recommend you visit the Texas Legislature online website using the link on this slide. Now, the legislative process starts with an idea. This can come directly from a legislator or from various entities outside the legislator. Ideas can also come from the public, a finding in a study that supports a change, and so on. But only a legislator can file a bill. And after a bill is filed during the legislative session, which occurs every 2 years, it is referred to a committee in the chamber in which it was introduced in. So if a House bill was filed in the House, it is referred to a House committee. And a Senate bill is reviewed by a Senate committee. And nearly all bills filed are referred to a committee, but most bills, quote unquote, die in committee and do not make it to the floor of the chamber. This is for various reasons, such as lack of support, timing, or competing priorities. And additionally, committees have limited time as there are only 140 days in the legislative session and thousands of bills are filed each session. So this often has legislators prioritizing bills that are urgent or favored by the public. In this perfect scenario we have depicted here, the bill is passed onto the floor within the same chamber for debate. So a House bill will move onto the House floor and a Senate bill will move onto the Senate floor. And after the bill is passed in the chamber it originated in, it's then referred over to the other chamber where the bill will go through the same process. Now, during this process, changes can be made to the bill, and the two chambers must agree on any changes made to the legislation before it's sent to the governor's desk to be signed into law. And if a bill becomes law, it gets added, updated, or removed under the applicable legislative code. And rules can be created or revised by state agencies, such as the coordinating board, in what's called the administrative code. So let's take a closer look at the two types of codes since they go hand in hand. The Texas Education Code, or TEC, is a set of laws that govern education in the state, which are passed by the legislature. And that's what we depicted in the chart that we previously covered in the last slide. And each of the state financial aid programs that institutions administer or receive funding for can typically be found in the Texas Education Code. And within each program, the law specifies whether rules can be created by a state agency, such as here at the coordinating board, or to help interpret the program, which is done by the Texas Administrative Code, or TAC. So let's look at the Texas Grant Program. Subchapter M, found in the Education Code, is what authorizes the actual program, gives the coordinating board the authority to adopt rules, and outlines the basic eligibility requirements for the program. But it doesn't give you all the information or details you may need to administer the program. For example, statute specifies that a student needs to meet satisfactory academic progress towards a baccalaureate degree. But what does that mean? This statute doesn't necessarily give you a specific GPA a student must maintain or a completion rate. So this is where the coordinating board is given the authority to fill in these blanks or uncertainties through rulemaking in the Texas Administrative Code. So hopefully now that you understand the two codes and their differences, let's tie this all in together. The program guidelines essentially help translate the two codes, but will never override or supersede the codes. The law always taking precedent. So as a quick recap, law is passed by legislators. Rules are created by the coordinating board or the applicable state agency. And our agency creates program guidelines as a resource to support institutions with our state aid programs. Now, let's begin looking at this year's updates to the guidelines. Starting with our annual updates. These are your typical or standard changes like the program years, which were updated to 25-26 throughout the guideline documents, which helps you ensure you're looking at the right award year. In addition, key dates, if applicable for the program, have been updated. So for example, pictured here is the authority to transfer section that can be found in the Texas Grant, TEOG, TEG, and Work Study guidelines, which includes the deadline to submit a transfer request reflecting next year's date. We also have the processing funds section here as an example where we give guidance on when institutions can start requesting funds. When the coordinating board will begin processing funds and the last day to request funds. For program where the priority deadline is relevant, we added an alert box to clarify the extension of the 25-26 state priority deadline. This year, it was extended from January 15th to February 15th, 2025, due to the delay in the launch of the FAFSA. Another change that you may notice is that the various links leading to the Texas Administrative Code website were updated to point to their new and improved website. We will be taking a closer look at the website in a moment to show you how to find things more easily for those who are perhaps new to looking at the code or for those who haven't seen the new site yet. And lastly, you'll notice that many of the program guidelines have an alert box to clarify rule amendments that were adopted in January and April of this year, which may impact the references found in the guidelines. Since rules change frequently, it's always best to refer to the actual rules in the administrative code since guidelines are only published once a year. Now, most of these rule updates that occurred this year were non-substantive, as in they do not affect the content in the guidelines or how you administer the program. This included things like moving around program rules to new sections. We added or removed language to rules to improve clarity. For example, we've updated language throughout the rules to remove the word award to avoid confusion. So for the grant programs, the word award was changed to the more precise term grant as a noun, and then offer as a verb to avoid potential confusion. And these are just some of the updates that we've made to the guidelines. In addition to the alert box in the guidelines, we sent out a summary of the various changes on May 28th. The communication contained a document that highlights the changes to programs adopted by the board in the last 2 board meetings. And we highly recommend you check out this document just so you're aware of what rule sections were impacted. These changes became effective in May, and the listing includes hyperlinks to current rules and a high-level step-by-step guide on how to navigate the Texas Administrative Code, which is what we're going to cover in more detail in the next few slides. All right, so now that we've covered some overarching changes in guidelines, we're going to take a little detour. Let's get into the weeds of the TAC website. It's important to understand that the TAC, as an institutional administrator, because you need to be able to look into the code to see current rules and also look up historical information at any given point. While the guidelines are a helpful resource, you should always check both the Texas Administrative Code and the Texas Education Code to ensure that you're aligned. So let's take a look together. So this is the new and improved TAC website that was launched in early 2025. Now, if you haven't updated your bookmarks or favorites to the new TAC website, please do so because links to the old TAC will no longer work. Also, note that hyperlinks in our older resource documents, like our guidelines, will no longer work. So this walkthrough will also help you understand how to find relevant codes when needed. The TAC is a compilation of all state agency rules in Texas. As you can see on the screen, there are 17 titles in the Texas Administrative Code, and each title represents a subject category, and related agencies are assigned the appropriate title. And there are some enhancements that were made to the website, which we'll review in a moment. But to get to the Texas Administrative Code, you'll need to visit the Texas Secretary of State website first, which is in the link provided on this slide. On the Texas Secretary of State website, hover over Rules and Meetings on the main menu and click on Texas Administrative Code. Next, you're going to click on the View the Current Texas Administrative Code and click under Quick Links under the Quick Links section in the Texas Administrative Code welcome page. And in the View TAC Titles page, click Title 19 Education. In the View TAC Parts page, click Part 1 Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Now, there are several chapters under Part 1 that may be of interest. Chapter 13 has rules on financial planning, and this contains rules on tuition and fees and rules related to the financial aid for SWIFT transfer program. Chapter 21 has rules primarily on exemptions and waivers. And Chapter 22 contains rules on grants, scholarships, loans, and work study. This is likely the chapter you will visit the most. And as I mentioned before, rules change frequently. Even now, there is rulemaking in progress. So if there are any significant changes to these chapters in the future, let's say if something was relocated to another chapter, or if a chapter is added, we will inform institutions of any changes that may affect the order and the content of these chapters. Now, in this screenshot, we are in Chapter 22, Student Financial Aid Programs. This is probably going to be the chapter you visit the most, since the majority of state financial aid programs institutions work with will be found here. And at the start of the page is Subchapter A, General Provisions. This contains rules and definitions that apply throughout the chapter, and the remaining subchapters contains rules for specific programs. In this example, we're going to click on the Tuition Equalization Grant, or Subchapter B, which will direct you to program rules, starting with the authority and purpose and definitions relevant to the program, and so on. And you can click on any rule you would like to review. In this example, we are going to click on 22.24, eligible students. Now, let's look at how a rule on this new web page looks. Each rule now has 4 tabs, starting with the TAC Rule tab, which displays the rule that is currently in effect. There's also navigation links available to move to the next or previous rule. And this feature isn't new, but I think it's helpful to cover. At the bottom of each rule is a source note, and source notes provide a record of rulemaking history. Each source note contains when a rule was adopted or amended, the date it became effective, and where the rule was published in the Texas Register with the volume and the page number. So in this example, this rule was amended to be effective May 15th, 2025, and was published in volume 50 of the Texas Register under page 2789. And this can be a quick way for institutions to identify if any changes have occurred to program rules. Moving on to the historical tab, this shows past versions of rules that were previously in effect. This tab can be useful when looking at a rule that may have changed throughout the years, especially for auditing purposes, as program rules can change from one award year to the next. Next is the Texas Register tab that contains an archive of rules that have been submitted to the Texas Register. Not all rules submitted to the Texas Register are adopted. Let's look at the different types of rules you can find on this page. The first being a proposed rule, which is a drafted rule that has been published for public comment, but is not yet adopted or effective. After a proposed rule has been posted, there is a public comment period of 30 days. Pictured here is a proposed rule that was published in the February 7th, 2025 issue of the Texas Register. And proposed rules look very much like a draft. Strike-throughs throughout the proposed rule indicate language that is to be removed, and underlined sections is language that is to be added to the rule. And the coordinating board does send out notifications to inform our stakeholders anytime there is a proposed rule going to the Texas Register that could impact institutions or programs. And an adopted rule is a rule that has completed the proposal and comment process and has been adopted by the board and is and thus finalized. And in this example, is a modified version of the proposed rule that we previously covered. Adopted rules can be different from the proposed rule. It just depends on the feedback received from the public comment period or if there was additional further internal review. And after adoption each quarter, the coordinating board again sends out a notification to inform our stakeholders of adopted rules. Now, an emergency rule is a rule that is put into place immediately without the 30-day public comment period due to an urgent need. This isn't a common activity. This is mainly used when the legislature passes a bill that applies at the start of an upcoming school year. The time it would take to draft a rule, file the proposed rule with the Texas Register, then the rule is published for public notice, and it's followed by the 30-day public comment period, and then taking into consideration the public's feedback for the rule. It would just take too long for something that needs to be set in place by fall. And to view more information on a drafted rule, click on the View Preamble link under the specific rule you are viewing. The preamble contains the background, the purpose, and the justification for drafted rules. And the last tab in each rule is the View PDF tab. This allows you to download or print the current rule in effect. So now that we have covered the Texas Administrative Code and you have learned more about how to navigate and look up information, hopefully you will know where to go if you need to access things in the future. Let's go over some program-specific guideline updates. Starting with the new Student Scholarship Program guidelines. For 24-25, when this program first launched, we released a fact sheet with all important information on the program. But now that it's more established, we have created program guidelines to further support institutions and ensure there is clarity in eligibility, application, and the disbursement process. As for state grant updates, the Priority Student Aid Index for TEOG and Texas Grant was updated to 6,514. And And the maximum amounts for each grant program that were sent out earlier this year have been updated in the applicable guideline. All right, so let's take a look at the substantive changes in the TEG and the Texas College Work Study program. You'll see here that program rules found in the Texas Administrative Code were amended on April 24, 2025 to remove references to theological seminaries and religious degree programs. These rule amendments became effective and were published online on May 15th, 2025. For TEG, the amendment removed the participation restriction in the program by theological seminaries and students enrolled in degree plans intended to lead to religious ministry. And for work study, it removed the eligibility restriction for students enrolled in degree plans intended to lead to religious ministry. As for the loan programs, we modified the guidelines to provide more detail in certifying loan applications and in the manageable debt calculation sections to give institutions more detail on these processes. In the certifying loan application section, we added elements institutions are required to verify when certifying a loan. And in the manageable debt calculation section, we've included the calculation the coordinating board uses when determining a student's manageable debt to help institutions understand what goes into the determination of a student's final approved loan amount. And as for the financial aid for Swift transfer program, a new reporting section was added to clarify how program funds should be reported by both public community colleges and public institutions in the annual financial report. Lastly, we are going to look at the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program. Originally, when we published the guidelines for this program, we created a new section to align with rule changes that had been done earlier in the year. As of a few weeks ago, after the legislative session ended, this information became outdated and inaccurate. The 89th Texas Legislature passed House Bill 300, amending Section 61.9775 of the Texas Education Code to eliminate the restriction that disqualified a task recipient after completing 150 credit hours or earning a bachelor's degree. The amendment also introduced a new restriction limiting eligibility to a maximum of 4 academic years. So this is a great example of how a program can be changed in statute, but rules have not been updated to reflect these changes, and thus the guidelines are not in alignment with statute. This demonstrates why it's essential to always check statute and to understand that rule changes can typically take a while to appear online. You always want to do your due diligence to make sure that you are up to speed on program changes and partner with the coordinating board to seek clarification as needed. We're always here to help y'all out if you have any questions, especially if there's new legislation that has passed. Now, we do hope that this review of program guidelines was useful and that you can see the benefit at times at timing challenges that can occur. With the knowledge you learned today, our hope is that you will be able to go into the codes to verify information to ensure that you're always up to speed on the latest information. Okay, so moving on to some important deadlines, reminders, and notifications that we want to ensure you're all aware of before we wrap up. So the last day to request 2024 25 authority to transfer funds for Texas Grant, TEOG, TEG, and work study is next week, Tuesday, July 1st. You'll need to log into the grant and aid processing platform to make this request. And institutions must validate their 24-25 FAD Cycle 2 file by the 16th of July. And the last day to submit a 23-24 net price calculator file is on July 18th. And just as a reminder, the coordinating board will be closed next week on Friday, July 4th, and the following Monday, July 7th, in observance of Independence Day. All right, so let's cover some upcoming notifications, starting with the Move It website address change. The website address to access Move It DMZ will be changing after a planned maintenance this Saturday. And more details were sent out today in a memo, so please be on the lookout for that. We are also planning to send out allocation announcements for 25-26 and 26-27 for specific programs. We have also published a revised financial aid database report manual for 24-25, so please replace any copies you're using to ensure you have the correct instructions. And coming soon will be the educational aid exemption application, a list of participating institutions who participate in the educational aid program, and our student FAQs for the program. We are also going to send out the 25-26 and 26-27 program participation agreement to institutions soon. So keep a lookout for that. It's important to submit one each biennium in order to receive your funding. And lastly, the TEG engagement guide will be published later this summer for institutions who participate in the program. So keep a lookout for that too. Now we'll look at the ways that you can stay connected with us at the coordinating board should you have questions or need assistance related to policy or resources. We have our borrower services and Texas financial aid information phone numbers available to student borrowers and the public. We also have our financial aid services phone line available for institutions. Our hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We are closed for lunch from 12 to 1 daily. And of course, we have our online contact us inquiry form, which we will review together. To ensure inquiries are routed correctly, complete the following steps. Select institution in the received from box and select the applicable institution in the institution box. Select email as a preferred method of contact. Always select financial aid question as the subject. And we always recommend that you provide your direct phone number in your inquiry. And always include a detailed comment or question so we can understand how to further assist you.